For years, millions of people knew Loren Allred's voice without knowing Loren Allred herself. They heard her in movie theaters, they heard her on streaming platforms, they heard other singers perform her song, and they probably heard Never Enough from The Greatest Showman more times than they can remember. But when people asked who actually sang it, the answer wasn't always obvious. Rebecca Ferguson was the actress playing Jenny Lind on screen, but the powerful vocals belonged to Loren Allred. Her voice became one of the most recognizable sounds from the movie, yet her name remained much less familiar to the general public. And that creates a fascinating question. What happened to the woman behind Never Enough after the song became such a huge success? Did she disappear? Did she walk away from music? Or was something else happening behind the scenes? To understand what happened to Loren, you have to understand how unusual her rise actually was. Loren Allred was born on June 7, 1989 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and music was part of her life from the beginning. Her mother, Carol Allred, was a classical soprano and vocal teacher, while her father, Brady Allred, was a conductor and music educator. Loren grew up surrounded by music and eventually began pursuing a professional career of her own. But her first major television opportunity didn't turn into the breakthrough people might expect. In 2012, she auditioned for the third season of The Voice in the United States. She joined Adam Levine's team and advanced through the competition, but her journey ended during the live shows. She didn't leave the program as a major television star. There was no championship victory, no guaranteed record deal waiting at the finish line. She simply went back to work. And that decision turned out to matter more than anyone could have known at the time. A few years later, Loren found herself involved in a project that would change her career in a completely different way. The Greatest Showman arrived in 2017, with Hugh Jackman, Zac Efron, Zendaya, and Rebecca Ferguson leading the cast. The film became known not only for its story and performances, but also for its soundtrack. One song in particular began to take on a life of its own. Never Enough was written by Justin Paul and Benj Pasek for the character Jenny Lind. Rebecca Ferguson portrayed Lind on screen, but Loren Allred provided the singing vocals. Suddenly, Loren's voice was inside a major Hollywood production, reaching audiences around the world, and the song itself became enormously popular. But this success came with an unusual twist. The world heard Loren before it really knew Loren. Her voice was attached to another actress's face. The character had a name. The movie had stars. The soundtrack had millions of listeners. But the singer behind one of its most memorable performances wasn't necessarily the person audiences remembered. That created a strange kind of fame. Loren was an unknown in the professional music world. She had already appeared on television and continued working as a singer. But the wider audience could recognize Never Enough without recognizing the woman who recorded it. The song was covered by aspiring singers, performed in competitions, uploaded online, and repeatedly rediscovered by new audiences. Every time someone sang it, the power of Loren's original recording reached another group of listeners. Yet the same question remained: who was the woman behind that voice? And this is where Loren's story becomes different from the typical overnight success narrative. Her voice had already achieved something massive. What she didn't yet have was the same level of public recognition attached to her own identity. That can be a difficult position for any artist. A famous song can open doors, but it can also become the thing people expect you to repeat forever. If audiences know you primarily because of one performance, the next challenge is proving that you're more than that performance. Loren had to build a career beyond a movie character and beyond one song. She continued pursuing music and professional opportunities, but the public spotlight eventually moved elsewhere. The Greatest Showman was no longer the new phenomenon it had been when it first exploded. New songs appeared. New performers became viral. New talent show contestants captured attention. And Loren's story could easily have remained a footnote in the history of the movie soundtrack, except she wasn't finished. In 2022, Loren Allred appeared on Britain's Got Talent, and this time she wasn't hiding behind anyone else's character. There was no actress representing her. no movie scene separating her from the audience. She walked onto the stage as Loren Allred. When she explained that she was the voice behind Never Enough, the judges immediately understood why the moment mattered. They had heard the song before. Millions of viewers had it too. But now the person behind the voice was standing directly in front of them. Then Loren began singing. She performed Never Enough, the song that had introduced her voice to the world years earlier. But this time the audience wasn't watching Jenny Lind. They were watching Loren. The performance created exactly the kind of moment television talent shows are built around. The judges reacted strongly, the audience recognized the song, and Amanda Holden ultimately pressed the golden buzzer, sending Loren directly through to the live shows. Confetti filled the stage, and suddenly the story had come full circle. The singer who had been famous without always being recognized was now receiving one of the biggest possible endorsements on a major talent show. But the golden buzzer wasn't the end of the story. In some ways, it created a new problem. Now that everyone knew Loren's name, what would they remember her for? Would she remain the woman who sang Never Enough? Or could she establish herself as Loren Allred, the artist? That distinction is important because a viral moment can be powerful without being permanent. Television can make someone famous overnight, but staying relevant requires something completely different. It requires consistency, it requires new work, and it requires an identity that can survive after the audience moves on to the next viral performance. Loren had already demonstrated that she could deliver a huge vocal performance. Nobody needed convincing on that point. The bigger challenge was showing that there was more to her than one song. Her Britain's Got Talent appearance, therefore, wasn't simply a comeback. It was an attempt to change the way the audience understood her. And there was something almost poetic about the song she chose. Never Enough was the song that made Loren's voice famous, but it also represented the limit of being known primarily for someone else's production. She could sing it perfectly, and people would always associate her with it. But an artist's career cannot stop at the moment people first discover them. The song was an introduction, not a complete biography. The Greatest Showman gave Loren exposure. Britain's Got Talent gave her another platform. But neither could automatically define what came next. That is why asking what happened to Loren Allred can lead to the wrong assumption. It suggests that she must have disappeared simply because she wasn't constantly in the headlines. But the entertainment industry doesn't work that way. Not every artist who stops appearing on television has stopped working. Not every performer who isn't trending has abandoned their career. Loren's story is less about a mysterious disappearance and more about the difference between public visibility and professional work. She continued pursuing music and performance opportunities, while the massive cultural spotlight surrounding Never Enough naturally became less intense over time. And this is something audiences often misunderstand about talent show and reality TV careers. A contestant can receive millions of views, become a viral sensation, and still face years of work afterward. The television moment is only the visible part. Behind it are recordings, performances, songwriting, rehearsals, networking, auditions, and the constant effort to remain relevant in an industry that moves extremely quickly. Loren experienced that reality from a particularly unusual position. She had already reached a massive audience through a film, but many people didn't know who she was. Then she reached another massive audience through Britain's Got Talent, this time with her own name attached. The challenge was no longer being heard, it was being remembered. And perhaps that's the most interesting thing about Loren's career. She never really needed to prove that she could sing. Never Enough had already done that. What she needed was to convince people that the singer behind that song had a story worth following beyond it. Her Britain's Got Talent performance gave audiences a new reason to pay attention. It transformed the question from who sang that song into who is Loren Allred. The answer goes back much further than The Greatest Showman. It goes back to a young singer raised in a musical family, someone who took a chance on The Voice and experienced the disappointment of not turning that opportunity into a major victory. Instead of stopping there, she continued working. Years later, she became the singing voice behind one of the biggest songs associated with a major musical film. Then, when most people would have been satisfied simply to have that achievement on their resume, Loren stepped into another spotlight and made the connection between her voice and her name impossible to miss. That's why the idea that Loren simply disappeared doesn't really tell the story. Her journey was never a straight line from unknown singer to superstar. It was a series of opportunities that arrived at different times. The Voice introduced her to television audiences. The Greatest Showman introduced her voice to millions. Britain's Got Talent introduced her more directly as an artist. Each stage gave her something different, and each one came with its own challenge. The biggest challenge may have been escaping the shadow of Never Enough.
That's not an insult to the song. It's actually the opposite. The song was so successful that it could easily become the defining feature of Loren's public identity. When a singer is connected to a performance that powerful, audiences naturally want to hear it again. But artists eventually have to move beyond the moment that made them famous. They have to create new reasons for people to listen. And that is where Loren's story remains unfinished. Because if you look at her career only through the lens of The Greatest Showman, you miss the years before it and everything that came afterward. You see the famous song, but not the work that came before the song. You see the golden buzzer, but not the years that made that performance possible. You see the viral moment, but not the career that has to continue when the viral moment ends. And that is the reality behind almost every major entertainment success story. The audience sees the breakthrough. They don't always see the years that make the breakthrough possible. Loren Allred's journey is especially striking because the order was reversed. Usually, people learn an artist's name first and then discover their biggest song. With Loren, millions of people heard the song first. They knew the voice before they knew the person. They recognized the performance before they recognized the singer. And it took years for those two things to finally connect. So, what happened to Loren Allred? She didn't simply vanish after Never Enough. She continued working as a singer and performer, expanded her public profile through Britain's Got Talent, and used that platform to step out from behind the song that had originally made her voice famous. Her journey became less about being the hidden vocalist behind a movie character and more about establishing Loren Allred as a performer in her own right. But there is still something unresolved about her story. Will audiences eventually remember Loren for more than Never Enough? That is the real question. Because becoming the voice behind a famous song is rare. Becoming the artist people continue following after that song is much harder. And Loren's story isn't finished simply because one song became famous or one television performance went viral. If anything, those moments created the real challenge. The world already knows what Loren Allred can do with her voice. Now the question is what she chooses to do with the identity that finally came with it. For years, people could say, "I know that song." Then they could say, "I know that voice." After Britain's Got Talent, they could finally say, "I know her." Loren Allred, the woman behind Never Enough. And perhaps the most surprising part of her story is that she was never really waiting for someone to discover whether she could sing. The world had already heard the proof. She was waiting for the world to connect that voice to her name. And once that finally happened, the story changed. Not because Loren suddenly became someone new,
but because, after years of being heard from behind the scenes, she finally had the opportunity to be seen on her own terms. So the next time you hear Never Enough, remember that the story didn't end when the song became famous. That's where Loren Allred's story really began. You heard her voice long before you knew her name. Now you know the woman behind it.